Today, I want to break down three of the most unmistakable signs that a woman is already experiencing a spark of desire toward you. But don't rush through this because the third signal is the one most men completely overlook even when it's happening right in front of them. Before getting into the signs themselves, there's something you need to understand clearly. If you've ever missed these moments in the past, it was not because you lacked intelligence, confidence, or social skill. It was because no one ever taught you how to read the actual language of female desire, and that language does not function the way most men assume it does. A man tends to experience attraction in a direct, linear way. When he feels something, he expresses it. It's straightforward. But a woman's experience of desire is far more layered and indirect. Instead of acting immediately, she observes, she tests, she creates subtle openings in interaction and then pays attention to how you respond to them. She rarely moves forward in a fully open way. Instead, she builds a kind of emotional and behavioral space, waiting to see whether you naturally step into it with awareness and confidence. This isn't manipulation. It's deeply rooted psychology shaped over thousands of years. From an evolutionary standpoint, selectivity and caution weren't just preferences for women, they were survival mechanisms. That instinct hasn't disappeared. It still operates quietly beneath conscious behavior today. So when a woman experiences desire, it rarely shows up as something loud or obvious. It expresses itself in small, subtle signals, almost like whispers instead of declarations, and if you don't know what to look for, you'll easily miss them. Signal number one, she begins initiating touch without any practical reason. This isn't about accidental contact or polite social behavior. It's about intentional, repeated physical connection that doesn't logically need to happen. She finds small excuses to bridge physical distance between you and her. It might be a light touch on your arm during conversation, a brief contact while laughing, or a moment where she adjusts something near you but lets her hand linger just slightly longer than necessary. What matters here is not just the touch itself, but its quality and timing. She doesn't immediately withdraw after contact. Instead, there is a subtle pause, a fraction of a second, where the connection is allowed to exist. From a neuroscience perspective, this aligns with what researchers describe as initiation-based contact. When emotional or physical attraction is activated, the nervous system naturally seeks confirmation of proximity. Touch becomes a way of testing comfort, familiarity, and responsiveness without words. In simple terms, her body is trying to answer a silent question. What does it feel like to be physically close to him? That extra second of contact is not random. It's communication happening below the level of conscious awareness. It signals comfort, curiosity, and increasing emotional engagement. Most men underestimate this moment because it seems too small to matter. But in reality, those micro-behaviors often reveal more than any verbal expression ever could. Signal number two, the quality of her gaze changes. Everyone understands the idea of looking interested, but very few people know what real physiological attraction looks like in the eyes. When a woman begins to feel genuine desire, her visual engagement shifts in subtle but measurable ways. One of the most reliable indicators is pupil dilation. This is not something she controls consciously. It is part of the autonomic nervous system, the same system that regulates heartbeat and breathing. When arousal or emotional excitement increases, the pupils naturally expand to take in more visual information. But it's not just about the eyes themselves, it's about how she looks at you. Her gaze becomes more sustained, more focused, and slightly softer at the same time. There is less scanning of the environment and more anchoring on you. It can feel like she is paying attention in a deeper way, even during casual conversation. You may also notice small shifts in her expression while maintaining eye contact. Slight pauses before looking away. A subtle return of the gaze moments after breaking it. These are not scripted behaviors. They are micro-responses driven by emotional engagement and internal curiosity. At this stage, many men misinterpret the situation because nothing is explicitly stated. But desire at this level rarely announces itself through words. It reveals itself through consistency of attention. The more her gaze returns to you without effort, the more her internal interest is being activated. This is also where emotional perception becomes important. You are not just being looked at, you are being observed with increasing personal significance. The mind naturally prioritizes what it finds stimulating, and attention follows that prioritization automatically. And if this explanation is already helping you recognize patterns you may have overlooked before, make sure to engage with this content from Intimacy Insight, because understanding these subtle layers changes how you interpret every interaction moving forward. What most men never realize is that these signals don't appear in isolation. They build on each other quietly, shaping a deeper pattern of connection long before anything is ever said out loud. She may also hold eye contact for longer than what feels socially neutral or expected in everyday interaction. And when she eventually breaks that eye contact, you'll notice something very specific. Instead of glancing sideways, she looks downward. That downward glance is subtle, but in nonverbal behavior research, it has often been associated with receptivity and a moment of internal processing rather than disengagement. It's not something she consciously performs or strategizes. It happens automatically as part of her emotional response. What you'll often see is a repeating pattern. She looks at you, holds the gaze just a little longer than usual, a slight smile appears, then her eyes drop downward for a moment, and then she looks back up again. This sequence may repeat several times throughout the interaction. In practical terms, it can feel like a quiet acknowledgement, as if her expression is communicating without words. I see you, and there is something about this interaction that feels engaging to me. And then we reach the third signal, the one that most men completely miss, even when it's unfolding directly in front of them. She begins to create privacy in situations where none naturally exists. To understand this, pay attention to how the environment shifts during your interaction. You might be in a group setting, surrounded by other people, but suddenly she starts forming moments that feel more private between just the two of you. She may suggest stepping away together under a simple excuse, like getting a drink or moving somewhere quieter. She might call you aside to show you something, or guide you toward a corner of the room where the noise fades slightly. In some cases, she lowers her voice even when there is no real need to, subtly transforming a public moment into something more personal. These actions are rarely random. They reflect intention at a behavioral level. In the end, what all of this really comes down to is awareness. Not overthinking every gesture, not trying to decode every moment like a puzzle, but simply learning to see what has always been there in front of you. Most missed connections don't happen because the signs were absent. They happen because those signs were subtle, unspoken, and operating on a level most people were never taught to notice. Human interaction is rarely direct in the way we assume it is, especially when it comes to attraction. Much of what is real is communicated quietly, through timing, through behavior, through shifts in attention, and through small changes in presence that carry far more meaning than words ever do. When you begin to understand this, your perspective on interaction naturally changes. You stop relying only on verbal confirmation and start paying attention to consistency, behavior, and emotional patterns. You notice when someone is present in a different way with you compared to others. You notice when attention lingers slightly longer than necessary, when distance is reduced without explanation, or when private space is subtly created inside a public environment. But perhaps the most important shift is internal. You stop interpreting missed signals as personal failure. You stop assuming that awareness equals worth. Instead, you recognize that most people move through social situations without ever being taught how to read these deeper layers of communication. So, misunderstanding is not unusual. It is actually the default. And once that realization settles in, something important changes. You become calmer in how you observe people. You are no longer chasing validation or forcing interpretations onto every interaction. Instead, you are simply present, attentive, and aware of patterns as they naturally unfold. That kind of awareness doesn't make interactions complicated. It actually makes them simpler. Because when you understand how subtle attraction can be, you stop needing to force clarity where it hasn't yet formed. You allow behavior to speak for itself, and you respond based on what is actually happening, not what you hope or fear is happening. At the same time, this knowledge also carries responsibility. Awareness is not something to use for control or manipulation. It is meant to improve understanding, not distort it. Real confidence comes from clarity, not from trying to predict or manage every outcome. It comes from being grounded enough to notice signals without becoming dependent on them. So the real takeaway is not about mastering signs alone, it is about developing perception, learning to see interaction as layered rather than simple, understanding that what is not said is often just as important as what is spoken, and most importantly, recognizing that genuine connection is never forced. It is noticed, respected, and allowed to unfold naturally. Because once you reach that level of awareness, you no longer move through interactions blindly. You begin to understand the rhythm beneath them, and with that understanding, you carry yourself differently, more present, more observant, and far less reactive to uncertainty. That is the real advantage. Not control, not prediction, but clarity. From a psychological perspective, attraction often develops through the creation of perceived safety and exclusivity. Before emotional or physical openness can deepen, there is usually an unconscious need to establish a contained space, something that feels separate from the rest of the environment. This allows a sense of trust and focus to build without external pressure. In other words, she is not just talking to you in that moment. She is shaping a smaller world within the larger social setting and observing how you respond to it. What matters here is your presence, whether you recognize the shift or ignore it, whether you step into that moment naturally or fail to notice it entirely. Because when a man is aware of these subtle transitions and responds with calm confidence and grounded attention, the interaction tends to develop in a more fluid and connected direction. If you've ever wondered how to respond to these signals in a way that feels natural, not forced or rehearsed, that is exactly the kind of deeper understanding explored in Intimacy Insight. It focuses not only on recognition, but on awareness, timing, and emotional intelligence in real interaction. And before closing this, there is one important thing to keep in mind. Missing these signs in the past was never about lack of value or capability. It was simply a lack of awareness of what to observe. Most people are never shown this layer of communication, so they operate without context. Now that you understand these three signals, your perception changes. You start noticing patterns instead of isolated moments. And that shift alone gives you a clearer understanding of how attraction often unfolds long before anything is ever spoken directly. Moving forward, it's not about forcing outcomes or overanalyzing every gesture. It's about recognizing what is already naturally happening in the interaction and responding with awareness instead of assumption.